We're in.
Hello, beautiful people, and welcome into the Story of Podcast. My name is Bobby Levine, and as always, Jeff Webb.
Good evening, Bob.
It is a good evening. It's 60 something and warm, a little windy down here in Florida, unlike the miserable cold up in Columbus, but we're rolling tonight. Tonight we have an amazing story, an amazing guest. Luke Himes, what's up, bud?
Hey guys, how's it going?
Good, man.
It's going good. It's a good day to be podcasting after a a week off, Bob?
A week off, yes. I was up in Columbus. Had to get all my stuff for the move in 2 weeks, and I couldn't have picked a better week. Yeah, I know, right? Well, you got dinner from me.
I did get dinner from you.
Gave a little to-go bag and Tupperware of salmon and stuff like that.
He treats me right.
Always treat the co-podcaster correctly. Before we jump into stuff, we have to give a shout out to our sponsors here, Chase and Tail Adventure. Go check them out. It is middle of hunting season, so they're having a blast. Jimmy sat me. He was in a tree in West Virginia or Cleveland, maybe Cleveland area. It was snowing, miserable, looked horrible, and the guy was up there with a bow, ready to kill some deer. Go check them out on Instagram at Chase and Tail Adventure. Go to the website www.chaseandtailadventure.com. Use the promo code Untitled20 to receive 20% off. And we have our new sponsor, The Plug. Kind of like Luke, a little bit. Almost. do you know what this is or no?
No.
You've never heard of it?
No. Tell me.
Okay, so are you a drinker at all?
Yes, I partake.
Okay, so the older you get, the worse the hangover you get. Is that correct?
For sure.
Okay. This stuff, I found them on Instagram. They claimed that they were going to cure you of hangovers. They said take it at night or take it in the morning. I got a little liquored up on Saturday. I'm not the biggest drinker at all. Woke up with a slight headache, and I was like, this could be a super long Sunday. It's like a shot almost, like a 5-hour energy, and threw that back, and I felt amazing the rest of the day. I'm not kidding you. I'm like, this stuff works.
I'm definitely gonna have to try it.
Man,
I would absolutely recommend
like
it.
a little bit on the edge on last Saturday, and I took it. I'm not actually sure like if it did everything for me, because I don't think I was at that point yet, but it definitely left me feeling pretty decent. So
good.
Yeah.
You can go to their website, theplug.com, and use the promo code theplug20 to receive 20% off on your next order. And I'm going to live by this, and I'm going to definitely check it out again this weekend when I watch fights and drink a little bit. So let's jump into the podcast. So Luke, you have an amazing story, and thank you so much for coming on. We've had to work around a couple date shifts because of election duties and stuff like that with our work, but you're here with us and you have an amazing story. So can we start out with who you are, what you do for a living, and I guess a little bit of your background growing up?
Yeah. So I'm 27. I'm living in Austin, Texas, and I own a small remodeling company. I moved down here kind of to follow oil and gas because I got my degree in petroleum engineering, and which is why I racked up so much student debt. But when I got down here, I figured out that oil and gas is too volatile for me to be staying in it for very long, and decided to break off and do my own thing. And it's been working out pretty well. I grew up in Ohio, and about 2 hours from Columbus or an hour from Cleveland, like the Amish country area. And it was pretty conservative, actually very conservative. And so didn't drink at all, didn't smoke at all until I went to college, and then just kind of broke off from there and I don't know, I guess I just went 0 to 100. And for the next 4 years of college, just experimented a lot, traveled a lot, learned a lot about life that I didn't get from my upbringing. But yeah.
Now, would you say that like when you went to college, you started experimenting a lot, was it more of like you just wanted to learn about all these things, or do you think it was kind of like a backlash almost at like not being able to do anything? Was it more rebellious?
I thought about that for a while and questioned it. I don't think it was rebellious. My parents and family and extended family are all extremely close, and they raised me to be confident by letting me just kind of have autonomy even from a young age. And although they have different opinions than what I do now, or they had different opinions than what I thought growing up, they were always very lenient with me and would let me explore those ideas and would never just tell me that this is the way it is and you're just going to have to believe it because I'm the authority and you should respect me. It was always a rational debate. And my parents are pretty stoic individuals. And so kind of fostered that experimental mindset without emotion kind of clouding it. And so as I grew older, and got to college, I experimented because that wasn't there for me at that time, but still with a very rational mindset, and not just because, oh, screw the conservative like upbringing I had and I'm going to rebel against it. It was definitely a thought out thing. And I said, I'm going to get drunk this weekend because I want to know what drinking is like, or I want to get high this weekend because I want to know what being high is like. So it was definitely methodical rather than just kind of like spur of rebellion.
All right. So you're in college and you graduated from
I
Marietta.
think I froze.
You back? Can you hear us? Uh-oh. The Austin, Texas connection. I'm going to tell Joe Rogan to step it up a little bit.
There we go.
Is he
Luke,
back?
we could hear you when you froze a little bit. Did you? All right. Well, we're
It's all
gonna
right,
work
guys.
on getting Luke back here. But
This is the first time this has happened.
yeah, honestly, we really
been what?
hit a good grace with the
Yeah.
Zoom for like what have we done? Like 15 podcasts on Zoom now, and we haven't hit
Oh, here he's back. Let's see what happens here.
a bad connection.
This was episode 15, I believe. Or no, 14, excuse me.
14? Yeah.
14, yeah. Luke, can you hear us? There he is.
Am I back?
Yes.
You're back.
Sorry. I don't know if you guys caught the tail end of that, but
Yes, we did. Well, we got everything.
Yeah.
okay, cool.
So my next question was, you were in college at Marietta and you were there for 4 years. Now, so we can get a storyline of here. You graduated Marietta in 2015.
Mm-hmm.
And how much was your student debt up to?
At that point in time, my student loans were around 130,000.
130,000. Okay.
Yeah.
So you graduate. Go ahead.
Yeah. A piece of why they ended up so high in the first place was because petroleum engineering was such a sought after career at that time because it paid so well and there was such high demand for it. And so going into school, I was basically told that if I could manage to get through 4 years of it, that I would have almost a guaranteed job and a guaranteed salary of 6 figures starting out. And that was true for 10 years running. So they had 10 years of placement whenever I entered, got through, and kind of expected that. And the school expected us to be able to make a lot of money. So wouldn't hardly give us any financial aid because they're like, we're giving you a degree that's going to make you 6 figures starting out. And so we're not going to hand you money when you're not going to need it. And so that's kind of what ended up being the case and why I had so much student loans as I was leaving.
Okay. So after you graduate, you go
I'm gonna
where?
try and get somewhere better.
Okay.
Is it freezing for you guys?
No, we can hear you fine.
Yeah,
Okay.
no, since you came back, you've been great.
Weird. Okay.
I tell Joe
So
Rogan
say that
to
again?
step up. Okay, you're good. I said, when you graduated, where did you go? And did you have a job right away or what happened? Oh, now we lost him. Oh, can you hear me?
So
Okay.
here, let me move somewhere better.
Yeah, we might need that. It's okay.
Yeah, give me a second. I think
no
multiple
worries,
rooms.
man.
This is the life of a podcast online in 2020,
Do you
man.
mind if I kick you out? Yeah, right.
This is great. I love
Thanks.
this.
Well, we get a little
right.
apartment tour while we're
Yeah, right.
where we're going. There we go.
Yeah,
Got a
we
nice
just
ceiling
moved into
fan,
this
nice
place.
lamp. Oh, cool.
So I don't know if this will work any better.
Beautiful.
Now we're right by the internet connection.
Perfect. Perfect.
Yeah. So I'm sorry. What was the last question?
All right. So the question is, you graduated in 2015, and obviously your school told you that you're going to have all this money and this job waiting for you. Did you have a job when you graduated, and where'd you go? Did you end up in a different city than Marietta?
Yeah. So when I was my senior year was when everyone was trying to like buckle down jobs. And I had been like interviewing for Schlumberger and kind of expected to be able to get a job for them. But things took a turn for the worse like early 2015, and oil started to plummet at that point in time. And so pretty much everybody got put on hiring freeze. A lot of like the classmates that I had who did really well in school, they had jobs and they stuck with their jobs. But a lot of the people who were like average on the grade scale ended up getting put on hiring freeze as well. And a lot of them didn't end up getting jobs graduating. So I got out and I still managed to find a job, but because the oil market wasn't doing well at all, they basically couldn't pay us the salaries that they would have originally offered. And at that point in time, I was, yeah, as a beginning level engineer, I was basically not making enough to pay off my student loans because the student loan payments were around like $1,200 or $1,300 a month at that point in time. And so I was like, I can't manage to pay my student loans, get a place for myself, and have any sort of like ambitions or hobbies or like invest in anything. And so I just felt really trapped at that point, and that's kind of what spurred my thinking to get into this in the first place.
Okay.
Now was what a lot of people when they're faced with student loans, they move back home, they move back in with their parents.
Yeah.
Was that an option for you?
Yeah, it was an option, and that's actually where I was living. But I mentioned it to you talking a little bit earlier about how like I am really unsatisfied with stagnancy, and almost to the point where I think it's unhealthy, but it's definitely abnormal. And if I stay in a place and don't feel like I'm making progress, or I feel trapped or anything along those lines, I will start doing drastic things. And I mean, that led to a lot of other, like, that's kind of been a staple for my life, even from a young age, and led me to do lots and lots of traveling in college overseas and just music festivals and all sorts of stuff. And it was basically any time that I felt like I wasn't growing as an individual, I would take drastic measures sometimes to challenge myself or get out of that comfort zone in order to keep myself moving forward.
All right. So you're at home in your parents' place. You have outstanding debt of over $100,000. You just said you've traveled the world. So when did this idea pop in your head of I should go down to Central South America and smuggle some cocaine?
I was actually down in Florida at the time, and I definitively remember saying this is going to happen to myself. And I had kind of entertained the idea because I recognized that due to the principles of high risk, high reward, that the fastest way to make money would probably be through drugs or some sort of other illegal opportunity. And I felt that like stealing or like, I don't know, just fraud or whatever was unethical because I really value the freedoms of individuals. But I also felt like the freedoms of those individuals also pertain to their drug use. And if they decided they wanted to use it, that's kind of on them. I recognize that there's gray areas there as well. But at that point, the logic in my mind was that it felt more moral for me to do that. And yet it could still manage to pay off my student loans. And so I remember being down in Florida and recognizing how easy it was for them to get cocaine flowing down there. And so after entertaining the idea of going to the source from the beginning, I was just like, you know what, if they can do it, I can do it. And I decided to, on family vacation, that this was going to happen.
So
even
you were
saying
down
it out
there
loud.
with what, your brothers, sisters, and parents just down there, and you're like concocting this plan like at the back seat of the table out at a restaurant or something, or like
Pretty much. I mean, I remember sitting in the back seat of the car and remember, I don't know what spurred it. It might have had something to do with like me and my brother and my sister went out in the evening or something, and I didn't have as much money as I wanted to. And being in the car, I remember sitting in, it was weird because I remember sitting in the back seat of the car and just thinking to myself as we were like driving, I don't know where we were driving to, but yeah, it pretty much I pretty much decided at that moment that I was going to do something about it.
Did you know it was going to be coke at that point? Did you, or was it just
So I had entertained the idea, but I hadn't committed to it. And so I had thought that probably it would be coke. I had done some traveling in Peru before that and recognized that the quality of the cocaine down there was leagues different than what it was up here in the States, especially if you made it as far north as Ohio. And so I figured that that would be probably the most profitable to do. And so, yeah, I had entertained it and looked up several different ways of being able to smuggle it. But yeah, I hadn't until that point when I was down in Florida actually like committed myself to it.
So were you planning on bringing this coke back and being the dealer, or giving it, or just finding a dealer and doing it that way?
I hadn't actually chosen anybody specifically. I didn't want to involve anybody. I was like, at one step at a time. If I can manage to get it here and sit on it, then I mean, it'll sell itself whenever I decide that time to come. Okay. So I had originally figured that I would get it here and then maybe take it to music festivals and stuff, because usually you can get more for your money selling it in small amounts. But if the time came where I really just wanted to get it out of my hands, then I probably would have found somebody and just sold it to them in bulk.
So you're at this point where you're you've committed to it. Well, you've like mentally committed to it, and now you're researching like how to actually do it. How did you like go about like actually Googling like how to do this kind of stuff, basically?
Yeah. So after watching the Vice video, which I mean, they took liberties that weren't necessarily true to make it thematic, or cinematic, I should say. But anyways, I remember seeing on the Vice video of them like having me on Google, like searching ways to smuggle drugs, which is clearly untrue. Like I run almost everything through at least a Tor browser. Okay. Anything that was risky at all, I would run through with a VPN or through a Tor browser. And most stuff I would just I just tried to be conscious of what things might be looked after and what things weren't. And I mean, you can look up something as simple as, will latex react with hydrochloric acid or stomach acid or whatever, and Google that, and it's not going to like send any red flags. But if you like start Googling like how to smuggle cocaine in the United States, I would usually do that through like more secretive things.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's mainly how I did my research.
So you ended up scheduling Peru. You picked Peru as your country?
No, I had done some traveling in Peru, and I thought maybe that, but my first instinct was either Colombia or Peru. But they have stricter standards coming into the United States from those two countries than they would a Central American country. Okay.
So what country did you choose?
I decided either like Nicaragua or Panama.
Okay.
But just as it had it, just all the traveling that we were doing and the way that everyone was migrating down through some of those countries while we were traveling, and then it ended up being Panama. Okay.
Now you flew down there. You don't know a drug dealer down in Panama. So did you have a one-way ticket and you were going to plan on the flight back, or did you have like, I gave myself a week to get this done, or what was the whole planning ordeal with that?
Yeah, I mean, I had bought a ticket down and back.
Okay.
And I basically had traveled with the group from Mexico down through all the Central American countries, and then split off from them somewhere in Nicaragua to give myself more time to be able to track down the drugs in Panama. There was also a music festival going on in Panama at the time, and I wanted to go to that because I had some other friends that were going down there for it. So I wanted to see all that and try and squeeze it all into the week. So I broke off and went solo down through Costa Rica into Panama and spent a week at a hostel, basically trying to track this stuff down.
And I mean, like through that week, did you have any like recurring characters that you were trying to like sniff out from, or like?
Well, a lesser known story was when I was going down through Nicaragua, I was trying to test stuff like along the way to see what the case was. And of course I get to this one city that's like kind of a touristy place for Americans. And so I go around looking for it and I find some guy who's going to go get it for me. I follow him to a place and I give him like 20 bucks or something because I basically just wanted to try stuff. And he just walks in this house and I like stand out there for like 15 minutes. I'm like, okay, well, he clearly just left me. Like he just left me. So at this point, I'm like, okay, well, I kind of deserve that. I go back down to the same area, go looking for more. And this time I run into this guy and his buddy, and I basically follow him. I'm like, dude, like I already got ripped off once. I'm gonna come find you if you rip us off. And he's like, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. And of course he sells me this stuff. I get it in hand this time. I go back to the hostel and I go to try it and it's flour. So
Oh,
I go, I know, I go looking for him and I find him down in the city. And I had a buddy with me at the time. And we like, I come up behind him and I like put my hand on his back. I'm like, hey man, remember me? And he's like, he basically is like, oh shit. And he takes off running through the crowd. There's hundreds of people downtown at this point, and I'm chasing him and my buddy's chasing me. And so I chase him down onto a beach and we're running along the beach and I'm just like on his tail, but it's hard to run in sand. And I dove for him once and I missed him and he keeps running. I get up again and I start chasing him down again and he ends up darting into like this back alley. And so I managed to catch him right at the end. And me and my buddy basically got a hold of him, but we didn't have enough time to do anything because the police must have saw us or something, because the police just like swarm us. And the police grab him and the one takes his helmet off because he was on a motorcycle and just knocks him out with the helmet and the dude's just out. And so I'm like, oh, it's gonna like, I thought they were gonna hit me. And thankfully they ended up just putting us in handcuffs. And one of the other guys was like, this guy's known to like rip people off for coke. So they arrested us for trying to buy cocaine. And they handcuffed me and my buddy together. And they were basically like, you guys are gonna go to jail. And like in the best Spanish that I could, which is not, it's pretty primitive. I basically was like, okay, well, we're going to have to get our lawyers down here from the States. And they ended up going off and debating it for a little while. And then they let us out and they told us to get out of town that night. So we did.
Oh,
But
so that was like a foreshadowing moment there.
yeah, I know. I should have known.
it didn't go well, but you were still determined. Like,
I was
Yes.
determined. Third time was the charm to make it really bad.
Oh
I mean, like,
my
did you go
gosh.
back to like a hostel and you were like,
Yeah.
maybe this isn't the idea for me, but you,
Everybody I was traveling with, I mean, people were pressuring me not to, but I mean, I had my mindset and I knew the alternative was just like, I don't know. Again, like living a normal life just doesn't compute for me very well. And so the alternative was going back home and working that job I didn't want to be working at and living at my parents for who knows how long. So I don't know, just I was adamant.
All right. So you leave town. You end up finding a guy
Yeah.
that gets you in contact. Did you meet him at a music festival?
Yeah, I get down to Panama. I'm at a music festival. I knew that I could probably find a best there. I find one of like the smaller dealers. They'll just kind of like whisper cocaine as they pass you, and like you'll be like, yeah. And so you talk to them. So I bought some from him, tried it. I was like, okay, this is good. I'm gonna go talk. I asked him. I was like, I'll give you like $10 if you take me to your dealer because I want to buy more. So he's like, sure. He takes me to his dealer. His dealer's just like in the back of the festival with a backpack on, like not at any shows or anything. I talked to him. He speaks primitive English. And I basically don't want to have any contact with him other than just to do the deal. I didn't want him to be able to come get me. And I knew if I got caught that I might I didn't want any like connection to us at all. So I basically scheduled a day for us to meet at a time in a certain place in the city and told him to wear a red shirt. And because I mean, I didn't remember his face whenever I first like saw him, but I went there in that place and was waiting around and he was like 20 minutes late and I almost bailed, but I just sat there for a little longer and he ended up getting off the bus. I approached him and he gave me some to test. I told him how much to give me. At that point, I was like, okay, meet me here tomorrow. And then we did the same thing. And then I started changing locations in the city. at different times once I was getting larger amounts. So I basically took it back and I tested it, and I weighed it and made sure he wasn't cheating me, and then started increasing the amount that I was buying from him. And as far as he knew, he didn't know how much I was going to be buying from him each time or how much I was going to buy until I stopped. And so he didn't want to, like, I was trying to keep him from trying to just rob me by never knowing where I was going to stop. And so I just kept buying and buying and buying, and until the last day. And I came up to him and I was like, okay, man, like, this is it. He's like, you're not going to buy more? I'm like, nope. And I just shook his hand and I ran off. And so,
Okay, so in total, for people to keep track of this was over a week time period. You kept
Yeah.
meeting this guy in the city, and how much did you acquire from this guy?
it was really about 4 or 5 days, and I ended up acquiring 285 grams total.
285 grams total. So for people that don't know, 28 grams is an ounce.
Yeah,
So you had a little over 10 ounces total.
right.
Okay. And how much did that cost in American dollars converted at over in Panama?
I believe it was like 2,100 for all that. I remember it being pretty, it was very cheap, but I think it was, yeah, around 2,000 for 10 ounces. So,
Okay. I'm just trying to do the quick math here, and so people can understand this
Yeah.
without getting their
200
calculator
an
out.
ounce.
Yeah. 200 or
So-
I'll keep it at 100. So that means you would have had $28,000 you were bringing back somehow. We'll get to that part, correct?
Yeah. Yes.
I guess you had it pure though.
Depends,
So I guess
depends on the prices. Yeah.
yeah.
So
Okay. Okay.
yeah, if you're counting at $100 a gram, but it was completely pure, which is way different than whatever anyone else was getting.
Yes.
And yeah, I hadn't made plans to cut it, but I also wasn't going to sell it for 100 a gram.
That's fair. Okay. And you tested this stuff? How'd you know? Did you test it every single time from the guy?
No, after like the first 2 times, I was like, okay, well, I don't think he's going to screw me over at this point. But I started out by, dissolving it in water and seeing if there was any impurities that didn't dissolve in the water, because cocaine is completely soluble in water. I threw it in some hydrochloric acid and saw how it sank. I burnt some in aluminum foil to see if it completely dissolved or left much of a residue. I actually didn't try it, like physically try it. I had some other people try it and they loved it, but I wanted to keep my mind as clear as I possibly could and really didn't want to have to fail a drug test if it came down to it. Obviously that doesn't make any sense that they would be drug testing me, but I don't know. I was just in my own space at that point, I guess.
You got to cover all your bases.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I want to know, for somebody who's never done this, kind of transaction, like the guy gets off the bus, how are you doing this actual transaction? Like what's the sleight of hand in a public space?
Yeah, I had worn like jogging clothes and was basically listening to music and would jog up to the scene, and he'd be sitting on a bench or something wherever we discussed to meet, and I would just go and sit down next to him and I would hand him the cash. And at that point we had built trust by working up the amount that we were getting, and so he wouldn't have to count money in front of me, and I wouldn't look at the drugs or anything. I would just kind of assume, because again, we started with really like 1 or 2 grams, and then maybe went to like 8, and then jumped up to like 20 or 40 or whatever it was. So yeah.
And you said your last encounter, you said you're done. Did you think he was expecting you to keep this up, or was you think he was going to try to rob you at one point?
I think he was expecting me to keep it up. I think he was surprised because it'd been so many days so consecutively that like he just was like, oh, okay, I guess this kid's done. But yeah, that was definitely why he was surprised. But again, I wasn't sure whether at some point he would just rob me. So I wanted to keep him continually guessing so that it didn't happen or didn't occur to him to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this whole process is pretty. I didn't even think of that. Like you work your way up, like, and you didn't tell him anything. That's
that was probably my hardest like mental battle to overcome, or one of the like the most methodical things that I had to think through, because I was like, how in the world is some white kid going to come down to this country and get 300 grams of cocaine from somebody random and not just get robbed on the spot? Like, you can't just walk around with a wad of cash. So I really had to think it through and trying to find a way. And I didn't want him to know where I was staying. And so I just took different routes to the location every time from my hostel. So like, yeah, I put a lot of thought into it.
Yeah.
And when you got back to your hostel, after you were done and you had all of that, what did you say you spent $2,100 American to buy all of it?
Yeah, something like that.
Did you do the calculations there and figure out how much you were going to make?
I had done the calculations previous. I figured I would, yeah. I had basically figured out how much I wanted, how much I could reasonably fit in my body, which probably leads to the next question. But I had done some calculations onto what I could actually bring into the country, and figured out weight wise and selling wise how much I would make profit on it all. Yeah.
So just my quick calculation: if you were going to sell it for $200 a gram, you were going to profit $54,000.
Along those lines, yeah. I'm sure it would have. I accounted for it being less than that because, I mean, depending on where I sold it, or if I sold it in bulk, or what my prices, or if I cut it, it would have just varied. But yeah, it was a lot.
So you were going to dramatically decrease your student debt. Was the obviously the whole main goal. Okay,
that was the plan.
So now let's get to the day of leaving Panama. I guess we can go back a little bit. How did you acquire did you travel with this stuff to pack the coke in, and how'd you come up with the process?
So I had done enough research at that point in time to know what I was going to do. And basically I was going to be putting them in latex fingers and packing it down in tight, tying them off, and then putting a layer of like hot glue on them. And things just got really rushed at the end. Other travelers were joining me from other places that I met at different points in time along those 2 months that I was moving around countries. And so things got kind of hectic at the hostel that I was at, and it wasn't able to be done quite as methodically as I would have liked it to happen. And so that, in combination of it just getting rushed flight wise, and there's just a large variety of factors, and a lot of them aren't really that explainable to people who weren't there at the time, but it just didn't afford me as much time and thinking and planning as I would have originally liked. So I didn't package them quite as well as I would have originally planned to. But I got all the materials and everything from the hardware store down there, and I tested out whether the latex finger gloves or the hot glue or anything would leak under the presence of hydrochloric acid. Basically, I tripled the pH level of stomach acid to guarantee that it wouldn't melt through the latex. And I threw a couple of sugar packet, or like powdered sugar, in the latex and packaged it the way that I wanted to package it, and threw it in that hydrochloric acid solution for a while and let them sit for like 2 or 3 days, and they didn't show any signs of wear. And so that's kind of how I decided I was going to do it.
Walter White.
Not Walter White enough.
So, for people who haven't watched the Vice piece on this, there's a lot of drama that was put into the just the bit where you're ingesting them.
Yeah.
How did you get yourself to be able to do that physically? Because like your body's not meant to put that in you.
Oh, I know. It was the thing that was done fairly accurately on the Vice video is show the size of some of the things that I swallowed, and they were about that big. Yeah. And that was another thing that I wasn't sure I was going to be able to do, because I have a hard enough time swallowing like a fish oil pill. And so whenever I got down there, I was like, I don't think I can do this. And originally I tried dipping it in oil because I've heard that can help. And that just made me gag immediately. It almost makes me gag thinking about it now. But I figured out what I could do is I would just put it in the back of my throat and take a water bottle, and just like, man, it makes me almost want to gag thinking about it even still. But basically would almost shove it down as I was swallowing it. And yeah, after a couple, it started to get a little bit easier, but it would still like make it the entire way down my throat. And somehow like at the bottom, right before it went in my stomach, it'd be so painful. And I ended up doing research, like looking it up later on, and it looks like the esophagus does like shrink a little bit right before it enters the stomach. And that just like hurt like hell. But
So what was your what was the exit strategy then?
Yeah.
There wasn't really the exit strategy was get to a hotel and get to a bathroom. I wasn't sure what to expect. I was like, get them. I'm like kind of a step at a time sort of person. I was like, I'll deal with that when the problem arises, but first I get them in my body and get into the country. I think I can figure out the rest from there. But
Good point. Good point.
yeah,
And the
I just-
alternative aspect of swallowing them was going
yeah,
up the other
I,
way.
right. And I had thought about it, but I've like, I just have never done that before. And I was like, you know, it's going to be easier if I swallow it and I can fit more in that way.
Okay.
So like, I don't know how I would ever fit 10 ounces the other way, but I was like, I know I can just swallow a bunch of packages and it'll be okay.
So you swallow all these though before you go, like, was it like right before, like you were right with the last one in, you had your bags packed, you just went to the airport?
Yeah. So I was kind of rushing at the end, like I said, and it was real late. I think our flight was at 3 a.m. And so I was just like basically swallowing them immediately. And what you're supposed to do normally is swallow like 7 or 8 every 30 minutes and wait for them to work from your stomach down into your small intestine so that they can space out more evenly rather than just jamming up. And I was in such a rush. I swallowed 48 of them pretty much all at once. And my stomach was so full. Like it was painful really. And yeah, so I think that, yeah, we'll discuss that later, but I think it played a role into why things turned out bad.
Okay. So you're walking out the door. I mean, like practically like still shoving one down your throat.
Mhm.
How like when you got to the airport, like were you like really nervous? Did you show like nervousness, or were you able to kind of keep your cool?
I was pretty nervous. I had done enough research to know that the body scanners wouldn't pick up anything that was beneath the skin. They basically just scan underneath your clothes and look at anything on the external portion of the body. So I knew that like I wasn't worried about that.
Mhm.
I was worried about having to throw up and my body just rejecting it. And all of a sudden, like just like my mind not being able to control my body and things just going south that way. I didn't really have a concern at that point in time that anything was going to break. I just more thought that maybe I would like react so poorly to it that like it would make a scene.
Mm.
On the scale of 1 to 10, how much pain were you in this entire trip? Did it fluctuate? Did it go up and then ease down, then come up again?
Yeah, it just kind of came in waves. Painful, but not like excruciatingly painful. It would be like it'd be like almost where like if you've been sick before and you're just like right on the edge of puking and like your stomach hurts really bad and you're just like, yeah, you just want it to happen. That's what it felt like, except I was fighting against it the whole time and it just happened that way for a couple hours.
And how come you didn't just get through security, throw up, and then take all the balls you had and just put them in a suitcase? Do you have to go through security again when?
No, so I could have done that. Like after I got out of everything, that looking back would have been a smarter move. But I thought that I was okay at that point in time, that I could just let everything go naturally. And I was a little afraid that my body trying to puke those things out because they were as big as they were, that it would potentially get caught and I would choke. And I was alone, and so I didn't really like have a good alternative. I mean, I think my body would have been okay thinking back on it, but I was like, they're in there. They're probably at this point working their way down into my small intestine. I should be fine. So I didn't like try and puke or anything.
So I guess I'm just trying to like visualize this without getting too graphic. So if they're
Yeah.
supposed to work your way, they're supposed to work their way into your small intestine. That's the plan. Is the plan to get them back up through, like, can you puke out of your small intestine, or are you going the other way?
No, I think once they're in your intestine, they're going the other way.
Okay, they're going the other, and that would have.
Yeah.
That's the professional tried and true method there.
Yes.
Okay.
Holy smokes. Okay.
That's,
So how long is the flight from Panama to, and where were you going to? Florida?
Yeah, I was going to Fort Lauderdale.
Okay. How long is that flight?
I think it was like 2.5 hours, or in between 2 and 3 hours or something like that.
So not long at all. So you were gonna
Not real
take
long.
off at 3 a.m. and you'd have probably landed around what 9 a.m. over there
Yeah.
with the time changes. I'm not quite sure.
Yeah. Well, no, I don't think there's much of a time change. If anything, it's like an hour. But
Okay.
I landed really early in the morning. So I think
Okay.
I got out of the airport like maybe 7 or 8 a.m.
Okay.
It was really early. And that was another like piece of like whenever I first tried to check in to like hotels, they were like, for today, or you got to wait until some more other people check out or something. So it just like kind of delayed stuff.
And so when you were looking for a place to go, was that kind of like, you were in pain? Was that like your next step was just get somewhere where I can be alone and just get it out of me?
Definitely. I basically went through customs. They had dogs and stuff there, and they didn't smell anything. So got through customs, went out the door, and basically like was like, I'm free. I made it. So now just get to a hotel. I got a taxi to a hotel, and that's when I started feeling really sick. I was like kind of pacing by hotels, and I like stopped in the one hotel just like briefly, and I was like, how much for a room? And they're like, well, it's early like for this following night. And then they were like, they basically told me that like to wait a little longer to check in because room clearance and stuff early in the morning. So there was a row of hotels. So I went down to the next hotel, and at that point I was feeling really sick, so I didn't go in immediately. And as I'm walking up to the hotel, like my body's starting to just like reject it like crazy. I'm in like terrible shape at this point, just dry heaving and trying my best to like stop myself so that I can compose myself to get up to the hotel. I think probably if I'd have gotten in the room, I would have just allowed myself to puke it out, but I was fighting it. And I was fighting it so violently that it was clear that I was struggling and I was in trouble, because whenever I went up to give like my card to rent a room from this next hotel, I was just like, I don't know whether I was pale or what, or whether I was actually dry heaving and couldn't tell. It's harder for me to talk about this part because there's still a lot of like memories like that are brought back from that particular moment. But she like looked at me and she's like, are you okay? Do you need me to call the hospital? And I was like, no. And so I basically got my card from her without ordering a room or anything. And I was like, okay, she's like, she could tell there's something wrong with me. I need to get out of here. And I thought I was going to puke any second then. So I get out of the hotel, and I like come to the conclusion that if I do start puking, I could potentially choke because I'm by myself. So I walked across the street and I went in a Subway, and I basically bought 2 giant bottles of water to force them back down if anything got caught in my throat. And I left, and I basically went and sat back behind these like storage units that were nearby. I sat down by myself. And actually, I missed a part of the story. Right before I went into the hotel, I felt like this violent shaking on my side. And it just like, I had read in the past that like sometimes the package will get lodged in your intestines and people will turn themselves in before they actually know that something broke. But so I was just like, okay, maybe they just freed themselves. And so I ignored it. But that's when like the puking got really violent. And so anyways, whenever I went back to the storage units and I started hanging out by myself, that's when I started to like feel better and the nausea went away. And then it wasn't very long before I recognized that one of the packages must have broken because I started to speed. And it was just very subtle at first, but then it just got really, really strong. I called some people that like I care about, and basically just apologized to them. My parents were in India at the time. I think I would have called them if that would have been the case, but they were like way out of reach. And so I called my brother and I called a couple of friends that I care about, and I kind of explained what was going to happen and told them that like I knew enough about what I had in my body that it was probably going to kill me.
Mhm.
So I just apologized and told them that I loved them and that I was going to call the police and call like an ambulance to come get me. And yeah, basically that's what happened. I hung up and I called the police, and that whole thing goes on. But yeah.
Before we get to the police part, though, so you had these balls inside you, and how many grams were each one of them?
There was about 6 grams in each.
Okay, so
Yeah.
for people that don't know, I think it was in the movie Blow with Johnny Depp. They were saying that you can only do a gram per hour, like the human body. I mean, obviously, I think he said he was doing like a ball per hour, or whatever it was in his crazy life. But obviously, there was a cut in one of the balls, and it was leaking cocaine into your system.
Yeah. I'm not sure whether there was like a cut in it or whether it just truly ruptured.
Okay.
Because of the way I know that like I packaged, some of them didn't get fully covered in hot glue. So I imagine that when it did, like if it did leak at all, it probably completely ruptured. So I think that whenever my side was vibrating, that was basically one of them rupturing, and that's when my body was like, hell no.
Yeah.
And I also think that was mainly due to how many I ate all at the same time. So basically, I packed my stomach with 48 of them, and there's only a fairly small hole for all those things to get through down in your intestines. And I think that just due to the sheer force of my body trying to force this huge amount of objects down through all at the same time rather than working them down through gradually, I think it put a lot more stress on some of those things, and the ones that weren't fully packaged correctly, like I think that's what caused one of them to bust.
Were you thinking clearly enough to know that's what happened? Did you think back to your packing and you understood that you might have not covered one
Yeah.
completely?
Yeah, I remember being there that night and doubting myself, and I was like, some of these aren't packaged fully and I shouldn't be eating them this fast. But whenever I had them all there on the table, all packaged, I was like, okay, well, each one of these is probably going to profit me around $1,000. Like, you can do just one more. You can do just one more, and before I knew it, I just did them all. So yeah, I mean, I knew that whenever one did break, it was highly surprising to me because I still had thought that I packaged them well enough that it wouldn't happen, but it also wasn't like my mind knew enough and doubted myself just in its regular doings that I knew that it was probably really bad, and I was beginning to speed enough that like my mind was becoming a burden. I thought that I might wait it out a little bit and see if maybe one of the packages was just leaking slightly and I could deal with the effects of it. But as it got stronger, I knew that like time was of the essence, and if I didn't get to a hospital, I'd probably overdose right there and pass out on the street and die. And so I knew that pretty much my only hope was to get to the hospital and have a surgeon operate on me pretty much immediately. So at that point, it became a focus of survival rather than like trying to evade. And I was thinking about last time I ate, how much cocaine I had, how much was in each package, the purity of the cocaine, how long ago I had swallowed it all, like when I thought it broke time wise, because I knew that all these things would come into effect when the doctors needed to like actually make the judgment call on whether to go in or not. And so I was basically just focusing on keeping my mind sane enough to be able to get to the hospital and tell them this. So when I called them, I was like, I need an ambulance here immediately and I need to be taken in. And they were like, why? I'm like, and at this point, like also I was still trying to save myself at least a little bit. So I was like, just send an ambulance. And so of course they send police officers there, and the police officers are questioning me like crazy. And they like aren't letting me really get into the ambulance. And I was like, okay, well, I know I need to go like ASAP. So I came clean and I was like, this is what I did. This is what I have inside me. And these are going to be the consequences if I don't get there immediately. I answered as many questions as I could. before I realized that like I need to get in this ambulance. And I pretty much just like shooed the cops off and I'm like, I'm getting in the ambulance and I have to go to the hospital. So I crawl up into the ambulance and I get in the chair and we leave and we're just like inching down the road. Like we are definitely going slower than the speed limit. And I'm just talking to the two EMTs, which are about my age at the time. And I like nicely turned to the guy and I'm like, hey, is like, could we get there a little bit faster? Like I'm in really bad shape. And the dude turns around and he's like, I don't tell you how to do your job. Don't tell me how to do mine. So I was like, well, shoot, like I'm definitely going to die now. And so anyways, the EMTs hooked me up to like, they take my blood pressure and stuff. And that's when they realize they're like, okay, he's in really bad shape. And so they're like, dude, we got to go now. And so he flips on the lights and we take off. I was talking to the EMTs during that time, but I think I kind of blacked out. I don't know if I fully blocked out or what. I remember being in the hospital in the bed, but I don't remember so much of getting out of the hospital and getting into the room. But once I was in the room, I was basically telling the doctors kind of what happened, and they immediately give me like some sort of medication. One was activated charcoal, and I think it was mixed with some sort of something to make me puke. I don't remember what the actual name is for it. And at that point, the detective comes in and he's like there to kind of see the whole thing go down. And I start puking up these packages and he does a field test on them as I'm puking them up. And I'm just at this point, like almost going crazy because my brain is racing too fast. And I know that I wasn't being extremely coherent, but the detective sits down next to me and we talk. And I come clean. Part of that was because I was highly impaired, but also part of it was I was just like, you know what, like it is what it is. Now I just deal with the consequences. It would have been smart probably for me to just shut up, but I wanted somebody to talk to. And so that kind of helped with that. Eventually he was like, okay, well, we're done here. I think I have everything I need. And he got up to leave. And I just stopped him. I'm like, hey, can you just like sit here with me and talk to me? Cause I think I'm like going crazy. And at this point, my body's just like almost shaking, like uncontrollably. And he's like, sure. So he sits down and we just like talk about life in general. And I ask him some questions about his family and stuff. We just like end up talking for another 10 minutes. Eventually, like the doctors come in and like at this point I'm like my mind's going out and I knew that it was about to like I knew that I was about to pass out because things were getting fuzzy. I remember just turning to like the people in the room and I was like, please don't let me die. And that's like the last thing that I remember. And my mind just like, yeah, from then I was just nothing.
How long is the time from when you go to the first hotel check-in to this point right here? Do you know?
I don't know for a fact. I think it would probably have been 45 minutes, 45 minutes to an hour, not very long.
And do you remember puking up? Did you puke all of them up?
No, I think I remember him saying like 30 or like 32, or later on, whenever I woke up from the hospital, like whole ordeal, I remember them saying that like I puked up a certain number and also in the case. So maybe I don't actually remember him saying this is the number that came up, but yeah, I do remember puking them up. I was puking them into a red bucket, a little pail.
And were they all sealed though? None of them, none of those were broken into?
I remember him saying that one of the packages was open. Yeah.
Gotcha.
So like there was pieces of it, whereas most of them I think were coming out full.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there could have been multiple like balls that were
maybe, yeah. Maybe.
Holy smokes. So again, for the people that are just listening to this now and that don't know anything about your story, you were put into a coma.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess they debated putting me into surgery until they ran some x-rays and stuff. This is just what I gathered from it later in the medical reports and stuff. But eventually, like, I guess it got bad enough and my body was like reacting so poorly. They were like trying to cool me down and had me on benzodiazepines to like chill my mind out. And they literally had me on ice. And they're like, okay, we got to do surgery immediately. So they took me into surgery. and they cut me open and I guess took out like the intestines and worked through them and opened the intestines and would pull out the packages as they'd feel them. But yeah, I guess that's ended what ended up happening surgery wise. And then they induced a coma because I needed to basically relax for a long period of time. And they were really having troubles getting my body temperature to stay low enough. And I also got a lung infection from aspirating a lot of the puke that I was puking. Like whenever I was puking out the packages or something, maybe I aspirated some of the puke and it caused a infection of some sort. And so they had me on antibiotics to try and kill that. So yeah, they induced a coma for 10 days. And yeah, I was in it for 10 days.
Gotcha.
And how do like medically induced comas work? Like, did you wake up like as soon as they wanted you to, or were you like a question mark for a while?
Yeah, no, I think I would wake up whenever they wanted me to, but they kept me under for those reasons. They using anesthesiology, they just kept me under. I know that at one point in time, they tried to switch me on medications and I woke up like violent and I was intubated. So I had a tube that was like helping me breathe and I literally tried to pull it out. And so they had to like get a whole bunch of people to like hold me down and like basically strap me to the bed. So when I woke up later, when they had me wake up on whatever medication they had me on the time, like my hands, like I was strapped to the bed and my hands were in like balls, like they had padded like these giant balls around my hands and cupped them. Yeah, it was definitely a weird waking experience.
Two questions. One, how do you know how high your heart rate got with all that cocaine rushing through you?
I don't know for certain. I know that whenever I was riding in the ambulance, they said I was right around 160 as I was sitting there. So I don't know how
Doing
high it ended
nothing.
up getting. Yeah,
Okay.
just like trying. Well, I mean, I'm sure I had some adrenaline going because I was nervous about the whole thing too, and that probably spiked it some. But yeah, just sitting there on the stretcher thing, riding to the hospital, it was that high.
And you said your parents initially were in India.
hmm
I'm guessing whoever you called in the time when you thought you were gonna die called your parents, or even the detective called your parents, correct?
Yeah, my brother called my parents.
And did they end their vacation right then and there and come back?
Yeah, it wasn't actually a vacation. They were there for like a mission trip. They're like I mean, they're religious and they're like some of the best people I've ever met, but they're always out trying to help people and yeah, that's what they were doing. Meanwhile, I was smuggling drugs.
Okay, so were they there when you woke up?
Yeah, they were. I know that whenever they first put me under or whenever they like had me go, they gave me an alternate name or what's the name of I don't remember like a pseudonym of some sort, but it was basically to they weren't sure if I was smuggling the drugs for somebody else. And so they put me under the name Lance Hatcher. My first name's Luke, last name's Himes, LH. I guess that's the name that they gave me, but it was to keep like if let's say I did it for a cartel, if the cartel figures out that you're in the hospital and they want to come end you before you can tell anybody, they can come find you if your name's under your actual name. So because my name was not under my actual name and they wouldn't give my actual name out to anybody, my parents had a really, really hard time finding me. They had to spend a lot on an attorney who then went to different hospitals and like they still like hospitals still wouldn't give it out. And my mom eventually just like they basically got a ticket straight from India to Florida and we're going hospital to hospital, like the big hospitals that they knew could do the surgery and like practically begging people to let let them see me. I know that when they got there, it was like they were there for about a week, I think, while I was in the induced coma. And my dad was telling me that they were still like trying to keep my body on ice to like cool me down and stuff, even like throughout that whole time, which is like 3 days after the surgery. So my body must have been frying.
So how did they actually end up finding you then? Was it legal? They got through like legal proceedings to be able to find you?
I think they basically ended up at a hospital and my mom, I mean, I'm sure she like broke down in front of people and was like, let me see my son. Like, I know he's here. Like, I just like, I know that they probably couldn't actually do it legally, but I'm sure that once they saw that the parents were in such distress, they were probably like, okay. And I mean, they had my actual name, and so my parents had their IDs and could like verify that they were my parents. And so, yeah, I think that rules were bent, but it's understandable.
Mhm. Yeah.
So you finally wake up and they're next to you, correct?
Hmm.
How
Yeah.
was that conversation?
Well, there wasn't much of a conversation at the time because I was still intubated. I woke up to them telling me that they love me, and like, yeah, that they're still there for me. Obviously, they weren't going to bring up like anything hard at that point in time. They were, I mean, my parents have never yelled at me in my whole life. They are people I respect like so much. I would never do anything around like, I would never, like, I don't disrespect my parents anything. They treated me like amazing growing up and were very rational with me and logical with me, and it kind of programmed me to not show a lot of emotion. And so like the not yelling, I don't think like, it's just, I don't know how to describe it exactly. It formed my own mindset about emotions, and so I can tell when my parents are like really upset, or tell when they're really serious about things without them having to raise their voice. So obviously, waking up and saying them, like, I was like, oh boy, like this is a rough one, but I didn't. It didn't take them yelling at me to know that they supported me and said what they needed to say, like that they cared for me, like overall, that things were going to be okay. And then obviously later on the road, we had lots and lots of serious conversations.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Mm.
And I mean, when I woke up, my mind wasn't there. Like, it took a long time for me to regain mental faculty. I was basically insane for a good while.
Do
And
you
I
me-
was yeah,
do you remember any dreams that you had
yeah,
like during
lots of
the
them.
coma? Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, like, I mean, I really struggled to know what was real and what wasn't real whenever I woke up. Like, they asked me like if I knew where I was, and I thought I was in Indiana for some reason. I thought, and that kind of like tied into one of the like dreams slash experiences I had while in the coma, about basically me being a homeless person. Like, I thought what had happened was I was released from the hospital like insane, and that I became homeless for a while. And I like have vivid memories of wandering around on the streets and stuff. And I thought how I ended up in Indiana was that I passed out on like a sidewalk, and then I was basically face down, and some cop like found me laying there, and they like somehow got my ID off of my homeless body because they thought I was dead. And it like gave my parents an address and everything. And so they basically, this is all what I thought happened. So I thought that the cop then sent information to my parents, contacted my parents, and then they sent me, because I was still alive, they sent me to Indiana, which was like kind of a middle ground hospital, which isn't really between Ohio and Florida, but that's what my mind thought at the time. So I thought that I was in the hospital from being homeless for a while, and that my parents had finally found me there. And so, like, for a good while, I thought I was in Indiana. And then finally, like, as time progressed, I was like, okay, no, I'm in Florida, and I remember what happened. I don't know, it was weird.
How long
Definitely.
do you think it took, like after you like initially woke up, to like fully regain your
I hallucinated for like 3 days. I didn't become really very normal until maybe a week. And at that point in time, I was still arguing that some of these experiences definitely did happen. And my mind was creating these reasons why they actually did happen. I was proving to myself logically and rationally that these experiences definitely did happen because this evidence, but this evidence was always just like predicated on other imaginary things that had happened to me. So I was literally like creating this like whole database of evidence that none of actually existed. So it took me after that probably a month to like really let go of all of those things.
mm-hmm.
And then like probably another like 4 or 5 months of like depression. But a lot of that had to do with it just the what I had to look forward to, knowing that prison was coming for me, in culmination with, I think, probably the amount of dopamine like damage that had been done to my brain because of all the cocaine probably had a fact, like an influence on my mindset at the time. And also, like, I had dropped a ton of weight, so I was like skin and bones, and I know that that wasn't healthy and wouldn't be healthy for my mindset. So it took a good long time for me to really recover from that.
Okay.
Hmm.
So how many months or how many weeks were you in the hospital for to you getting out and obviously going pretty much, I'm guessing, straight to court?
Yeah, no, so basically we had gotten an attorney, or my parents had gotten an attorney to figure everything out from the get-go. And while I was in the induced coma, like, I was originally, I guess, locked to the bed before my parents got there in case I woke up and decided to run away. But during that time, my parents contacted the attorney. The attorney got a bail, and they bonded me out while I was still in the induced coma. And then so that allowed me to like leave the state. They got all the legal workings out, so as soon as I could get out of the hospital, I could go back to Ohio and recover for a while. And the attorney was like, we'll put off the court case for as long as you need to recover. And I was like, okay. So I was in the hospital 10 days in the induced coma, like another 3 or 4 days in the ICU, another like 4 days in a regular bed. And at that point in time, like my mind was enough that I was like, I want to get out of here desperately because I hated being in the hospital so much. They were waiting on the antibiotics to really kill out the infection before letting me go because they were afraid that like it would make the virus stronger if I didn't end up taking the full dose. But as soon as like I had taken the full dose, they're like, okay, well, we can't keep you here. We recommend you stay here longer. But I was really itching to get out of there. So I maybe after like 3 weeks or so, I had ended my entire stay at the hospital and went back to Ohio.
Then how long till the court case? Was that a couple months?
That was like another 6 months. So this all happened. I flew on January like 20th or 21st, and then I got out like mid-February, and then in August is when, and I didn't even have a court date until I was working out the plea deal. Like, so I was originally looking at 7 years, and that was, well, it was a 7-year minimum mandatory. So I knew that I was going to have to serve 7 years, or that was what like was written in law. We started writing letters and stuff, and I started getting lots of letters of recommendation from professors I had from college. Obviously, I had to tell them what I did to like have it work out. I went and saw a couple psychologists because my mom was pretty sure that I was like, mental illness runs in the family to some degree. And my mom, more so than anybody else, thought that I might be schizophrenic. And so I went and saw some psychologists, and they were like, okay, well, he's fine. He just like struggles with a lot of existential things. And so they all wrote letters of recommendation. Like the pastors of the church that I went to when I was growing up, just lots of like community members wrote in, and lots of like family members wrote in. And by the time it was all said and done, between attorneys and writing letters to everybody, it got down to, they dropped it, or it got dropped down to a 3-year minimum mandatory. And at this point, I had pretty much said nothing the entire time. I was silent because my attorney told me that I should be silent. And I didn't really even have the mental ability to speak to what I did anyways. But eventually, like I came, like as I regained my mental ability and like began to like become more confident again in myself, I finally started drafting like a letter, and I wrote like maybe 4 pages. And at this point, my attorney was like, there's no way you're getting it any lower than this. 3 years is what you're going to have to serve. And he's like, I'm like, we've already gone up the chain so far, and you can't really go any further. So I was like, well, I'm going to write a letter. And he's like, no, you're not going to write a letter, because anything that you say here is going to be used against you, and it's potentially going to make it worse. And he had met me in the hospital when I was still crazy. And I was telling him that like my EKG machine was a video camera watching us. Like I was totally insane. And so he's like, don't you dare write anything. Like, you're going to screw us, man. So I write up a document, and I just basically like I'm so torn up in all sorts of different ways, like emotionally and mentally. And I just like pour my heart out and kind of explain my thought process going through it all and how like kind of the mental state of not being ever satisfied and what it's led me to do in different like ways. And I was like, okay, well, I'm going to send it with or without your permission, because I didn't want to end up going to prison without at least saying something like. And so I sent that, and I got worked up the chain of attorneys, like the prosecutors, and it made it, I guess, like high enough in the state prosecutors, where it was like one of five. There's only one of five of them in the state of Florida, and she read it, and I guess they ended up wiping the minimum mandatory of 3 years, and ended up settling for 21 months. So
Wow.
Okay.
long chain of events, but it worked down from 7 years to 21 months through lots and lots of, things.
So then to serve that sentence, did you have to go back down to Florida to serve that?
Yeah. So as soon as I like had my court date and stuff settled down with the plea deal, I flew back down to Florida knowing I was going to be checking myself in for the next 21 months. And yeah, my family flew down with me. A friend of mine flew down with me, and they all sat there in court as I accepted the plea deal, and they just led me into the jail. That was a hard time.
Did the attorney go like, wow, that letter was amazing after he saw it got dropped, the minimum?
I mean, you showed him, yeah.
I showed him before I sent it there. He's like, you at least got to send it to me before I send it there. And when I send it to him, he's like, okay, like I'll send it. And so, yeah.
So you walk into jail, a college graduate coming up from a very nice family, drugs not in the works growing up, and you're
no criminal
into,
record.
Yeah, federal penitentiary. How was that? Just a shockwave? Were you like, what the fuck is going on?
Yeah, it was pretty wild. First, it was a state prison.
Okay.
Because I didn't get caught like at customs or anything, and I ended up calling the state cops, and so Florida dealt with it as if I didn't bring it into the country. They dealt with it as if I had been caught in the country with it. So I ended up going in there, but yeah, for sure, I was just like, the very first time, like I get stuck in with the cell, guys immediately, they're just like telling me that they got put in there because they killed people. I was like, really? Like the first dude I meet tells me that he's in there because he killed multiple people. I ended up kind of becoming friends with the dude later on. And he was like, oh yeah, I totally made that up, but you got to tell people that you're tougher than what you are. I'm like, that's stupid. But yeah, so it was a wild experience. People immediately from the get-go are just like crazy. Like if a girl walks by any of the cells, it doesn't matter what she looks like the whole lot of guys just like pins themselves to the glass and is just like yelling at her. Like, and meanwhile I'm sitting on the bench, and I was just like, oh my God, where am I? Like, it's just craziness.
Did you write letters? What'd you do in your 21 months?
Yeah, lots and lots of education, mainly. I like when you're stuck with that much time, you either have the ability to just be lazy about it, or like use that time to work on yourself. And I know that everybody has had time where like had a moment where they were like, man, I wish that I didn't have like school or job or whatever it is, and could focus on like all these hobbies or skills that I've been meaning to do, or read this book that I've been meaning to do. And 21 months gives you all that time. So I worked out every day, sometimes twice a day. I would read books constantly. I spoke to a lot of people about like what they were doing. I learned a lot about law. I tried to help as many people as I could. I ended up being a teacher in a lot of different like prisons that I went to. I ended up in like this drug rehabilitation center where they basically voted me in as kind of like the leader of the prison population within that facility. And I ended up like tutoring and mentoring them to like help them get their GEDs. And so I basically spent my time improving myself and trying to help those around me. Yeah, but
I mean, I think that's probably the best way you could spend in 21 months in prison.
For sure. Like, I think that other people would do the same thing. Like once you get over that initial shock, you like realize that this is the perfect time for you to change yourself.
Yeah. Now you said you ended up at like a drug rehabilitation place. Did you like move facilities a lot in 21 months?
Yeah, I did. So I started out, whenever I first got there, they like give you like an aptitude test and an education test to kind of figure out where you were, um, and what kind of jobs that you would potentially end up at. Like they sent you through an orientation to try and figure out what kind of prisons that they'd send you to and stuff. Immediately, like because of my education level, they brought me to the warden, and the warden like basically saw the scores were, which I don't think were particularly high, but like being somebody, like they don't usually have college graduates in there. And so they like showed him my scores, and they're like, you want to learn to be a law librarian, like to help people with law? I'm like, sure, that sounds cool. So they stuck me working in the library, and I had to take a bunch of different tests to learn law, so that when guys came out of, like, we were at like an entry facility, which they're called orientations, or they're called, man, it's been a while, I can't remember. But basically there's 3 prisons in Florida that are where guys pass through it at the very beginning. There's one in South, Central, and Orlando, and then one in the North. And they process everybody in there, but that's when everybody just gets done with their court cases. And so they go straight to the law library to try and appeal stuff. So I was basically working in there for a while and learned a lot about law, learned a lot about cases from people like coming up and being like, I killed my wife, and yes, I did, but this shouldn't have happened because they searched me without like probable cause or something. And so I'd have to help them like draft appeals and stuff. It was a very like weird moral place to be in, but definitely interesting. But to continue on, sorry, I went tangent. Then they eventually moved me out. I stayed there in that max security prison because they don't know what everyone's levels at that point in time. So I stayed there for a good portion of my sentence. And then eventually, whenever it came time, I got sent to St. Petersburg, which is where I know you're from. And I worked at a restaurant there. It's called Work Release. So I was able to go there for a little while. Eventually, I got sent back from there because they have these tracking devices on you, and you're never supposed to like take them off or like get too far away from them. And where I was working in the kitchen, I basically was an expo, and there was like a parking garage above the restaurant, and so I was back there, and I could never get like service with my thing. So I'd go and I'd set it on a ledge to where I could like check in with it, and you could be separated from it for a little at a time. Basically, long story short, I forgot about it in the middle of my job, and the officers from the center basically like sent a signal that I ran, so they came down and got me, and they ended up sending me back to regular prison, which was like one of the worst experiences of my whole sentence. Like you have some freedom, and then it's just like stripped from you again, and this time you're not expecting it. So I then spent some time in that prison again, another max security prison, and then they review my case and send me to Daytona to a like drug rehabilitation center because of my crime. And then I did basically like the last maybe 6 months there, and really was released there.
So you did the whole 21 months. There was no.
No, I did. I ended up doing around 19 months. You can have
Okay.
gain time, which in Florida, you can only get gain time up to 85% of your sentence. So at that point, I had to serve 85% of my time.
Okay. Did you stay in contact with any of these inmates throughout the time? Still write to them?
Yeah, I do. I've been to see several of them since I got out. And yeah, I mean, I still maintain contact with a few of them. A lot of them I lost contact with. A lot of them got sent back to prison. A lot of them just like go back to using drugs and stuff. And yeah, I just like lose contact with them.
And then life after prison, having a felony on your record is tough getting jobs.
Yeah, it definitely made it a lot harder. I don't like to use it as an excuse because I think that even though it's a hindrance, I think it's too often used as a crutch, and like to make themselves almost into like a victim. Like I see a lot of my prison buddies just be like, well, no one's going to hire me, and so I'm not even going to apply to it. And so then they like, of course you're never going to get hired to a job that you want. And so I kind of ignored that for a while, and I found that quite a few jobs were more lenient than what you might expect with felons. And I think it has more to do with like how you present yourself and your willingness to admit that it was a mistake that you made and trying to move on from it. And I think that people underestimate how giving people are to second chances. I think that if you're willing to sit down and talk to somebody about your mistakes and be like, hey, this is who I am, this is why I did it, and I'm trying to make my life better, that people will go way out of their way to do things for you, even though you have a felony, than they would even a normal person.
Gotcha.
That being said, I had some applications get turned down because of my criminal record. And I mean, those sucked, but it really spurred me to like end up being able to work for myself and become entrepreneurial. And it basically took a lot of options off the table for me and forced me to think of new creative options for myself and where I wanted to go ahead in life. So yeah, at this point, it's not really hindering me very much.
Gotcha.
There you go. And I mean, you know, we were talking before the podcast a little bit. You're in Austin now. It's a great little place that you love to end up, and you got your own venture that you started.
Yeah. Yep. Down here working, remodeling, doing a bunch of bathroom and kitchen remodels. Hopefully going to get a house to flip here pretty soon. And yeah, I love Austin so much. It's such a great city. So I'm pretty happy right now. Things are a lot better even before the whole prison experience.
Yeah. Good. I have no more questions. Jeff, do you have any more?
I do not. But Luke, is there anything else that you want to let people know about?
Yeah, anyone that's out there listening, like, oh man, should I do this? I think I could pull this off.
Yeah.
What do you got? What's the last word you got to say to these people?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, what's expected is just to say no, don't ever do that. And I still back that fully. Obviously, the way that I did it was ridiculous, and I think that smuggling drugs is ridiculous. I don't think that I would ever dissuade people from taking risks, especially legal risks or healthy risks. And the reason why I did what I did in the first place was because I just felt stagnant in life and I felt like I was trapped. And I think that can be a good mindset to have to continue to spur yourself to grow in life. But it can also, like, you have to be really meticulous about like where that energy goes, because it could take you down really negative paths like the one I went down as well. So obviously taking risks in life is good, but they gotta be healthy.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, man.
Yeah.
That's an amazing podcast, dude. Amazing story.
Luke, man, thank you
Glad
so
you enjoyed
much.
it.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure. It was good talking to you guys.
Before you go, Jeff has to wrap some stuff up, though.
Yeah, for sure.
So this has been the Story of Podcasts. It's a wonderful Thursday night. We had our wonderful guest Luke Himes here, and to all of you listening live on Facebook Live, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening. This podcast will be up tomorrow, Friday, November 20th. That's it.
That's correct.
On all of your podcast listening platforms of SoundCloud, Spotify, Apple Music, Google Podcasts. It's all up there. The tape will be on Facebook too. Go ahead and follow us on Instagram. We are the Story of Pod _. Bobby's been putting a lot of work into that Instagram page. And we're so close to 1,000 followers.
Maybe Luke's followers could help us out. I'm gonna follow like crazy.
Yeah. We'll get a if we get over this hump, we'll have to give a special thanks to our guy Luke here. But again, Luke, thank you so much for coming on, sharing your amazing, insane story. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Yeah,
and
likewise.
Guys, we'll be back, I believe, in 2 weeks. Have a blessed, safe Thanksgiving. Don't do anything I wouldn't do. And I'll see you guys in 2 weeks. Night.
All right. Later, guys.
See you, bud.